a lesson on evaluation and application for interference theory. So picking up on the last lesson, which was lesson 9, and I'll add this as part of lesson 9 as well, with decay and displacement in STM, it's difficult to establish whether we forget because there's a length of time or because of interference. So Baddley and Hitch, piece of research that we can use here, wanted to compare two explanations of forgetting. Now decay isn't named specifically as an explanation on the spec, but interference is. So this is a good piece of research that you can use for interference theory. And what I've actually found over the last few years is it's hard to find a piece of research, believe it or not, that's memorable for interference theory. And this one, which I usually just call the rugby player study, is probably the best piece of research to use because it's the most memorable. So if you want to have a look, it is in the Green Herd book. If you have a look in your booklet as well, it's also in there. And it's the Rugby Player Study by Baddley and Hitch. Have a look at this study. So it's real life study. So obviously it's not something that's been created in a lab, it's not highly controlled and so on. So they asked rugby players to recall the names of teams played earlier in the season. Again, something that's real life, something that you are possibly able to do. Injuries and suspensions meant that most players they interviewed had missed some games throughout the season. So for one player, the last game might have been last week, while for another it was 3 weeks ago. So we have got some differences there. And they looked at the recall, how recall was affected by the number of intervening games, i.e. interference, and the amount of time that had passed, i.e. decay. So if it's the number of games between, we're saying that there's a lot of interference. But also in that time that's passed, there could have been other things that have interfered with it. There's a clip here you can watch. I'll just click on that just to show you what this is so that you can go and have a look at this for yourself. When it actually loads up. This is a clip that you can use on proactive and retroactive interference, just to recap on what we've already looked at that might help you when we start to look at this study in more detail. So I'll pause that and go back to what we were looking at previously, hopefully. Okay, so interference theory. Baddley and Hitch conducted real-life research into the theory using rugby players. Read through the study and then identify whether the study supports interference theory or not, and why. So I can tell you that it does support it. What I want you to do is have a look at why it supports it. What is it about this study that makes it support it? So if you pause the video now to have a look at that, and then we'll come back to it. So you should have found that the results do support interference. So they were able to show that the probability of correct recall was not dependent on the passage of time, as alternate theories would predict, but on the number of interfering games, i.e. interference. So rugby players who had a lot of games in between were less likely to remember. So it didn't matter whether they played the game some time ago or as early as last week. So what was most important, if you like, were the number of games in between. So this does have implications for the theories of forgetting. Make sure that you write, when you're evaluating, the study supports interference theory because, and you actually explain why it supports and therefore strengthens the theory. So we've just done a little bit of a starter, but the purpose and the objectives for this lesson are to evaluate interference theory. And we've just done a little bit of that there because already you've got one study to support it, and hopefully you know why it supports it. And then what we'll be able to do now, once we've got the one study, is use that one study to evaluate, and we'll be able to give strengths and weaknesses of that study, which in turn will strengthen or weaken the theory. So this is just a bit of a recap. I'm not going to explain this again. If you just want to have a quick read through it, make sure that you know the two key terms and make sure that you've got them filled in your booklet. So this is how I would help you to evaluate if we were in class at the moment. How useful is interference theory in explaining forgetting? Well, there is a range of evidence. Have a look at the evidence and then state whether this evidence supports or not, and then state why. So, one piece of evidence: McGough and MacDonald conducted a lab experiment to investigate retroactive interference. Read the study. It's in your booklet and in the Green Herb book. It should be in the Tutor to You pack. And it should say comment there, not comment. And comment whether it supports the theory or not and why. Evidence 2. You may or may not want to use this. For me, funnily enough, it's about which is the most memorable. Most people use the rugby players study, McGough and MacDonald. Burke and Scrull conducted research using magazine adverts. Again, read the study and comment on whether it supports the theory or not and why. So when you're looking at the evidence, you should have 1, 2 or 3 pieces of research there, depending on how confident you feel about this. So you could have the Baddley and Hitch, the McGough and MacDonald, or the magazine study. It doesn't matter which you're going to use, but first of all, I want you to record notes on: is the study artificial? If it is that high or low in ecological validity? If it's high, explain fully why it's high and what that therefore does to the study and therefore to the theory. If it's low, therefore it reduces the overall validity of the study and therefore reducing the usefulness of the theory. Population validity: who have they used? So for example, if they've used rugby players, how many rugby players have they used? And if it's only rugby players, does that tell us anything about non-sportsmen, for example? Is there a difference, for example, with males and females? Is there a difference with different age groups? The other thing is about the control, the aspects of control. Think about what's actually been controlled in the research. And if you look at something like McGough and MacDonald, there are going to be a lot more controls. But again, think about with the rugby players, they've all got different lives and it's going to be very difficult to control. Think about the strengths of the pieces of research as well. So, overall evaluation. Although the theories tend to be reliable, there are a number of problems with interference theory. Number 1, interference theory tells us very little about the actual cognitive processes. So I would describe this as a descriptive theory, but not necessarily explanatory. So in other words, it doesn't explain the process, how we forget or why. I apologise for the coughing. Difficult to distinguish between the effects of interference and other theories such as decay. Sometimes it would be very, very difficult to say, yes, this is definitely interference and not decay, which is just because of the time interval. You don't have a chance to rehearse it or recall it, and therefore it just goes. However, any lab experiment does attempt to avoid this problem by conducting experiments very quickly. So think about this in terms of lab experiment research. Again, please make sure that you have notes on this and that you have at least one piece of research to support it. If you know the research, make sure why it supports, how it supports, the method used, and then you should be able to evaluate. A bit of stretch and challenge, and when you finish that, please start to research retrieval failure theory, which is what we're going to be doing on the next lesson. Thank you, and as always, please contact me if you have any queries. Thank you.